They stood outside the little shed that was the entrance to the Salted Slug. Galta stared uncertainly at the shimmering gateway before his eyes. I don't know about this. He had felt much the same way the first time he saw the entrance, and he knew that his cousin would have the same reaction. Stepping forward, he braced both hands on Galda's shoulders. Let's go. It's chow time. A solid shove sent the boy staggering forward. Wait. Galda's voice was cut off as he went through the portal. With a mischievous grin still on his face, he stepped through knowing the others would follow. His cousin stood gawking on the other side of the entrance. Sneaking up behind him, he slapped a hand down on his cousin's shoulder. Galta jumped in shock, twisting around in time to catch Jonathan chuckling. I'll get you for that. The apprentice's smile widened at those words. Do your worst. You'll have to, because I'll get you again by the end of the night. Galda opened his mouth to say something when Magnus's voice cut in. Will you two cut it out? The boys both looked down sheepishly and grinned. Yes, sir, they chorused. Magnus was not fooled by their play acting. He knew them well enough to know when they were being sincere. That and the fact that their shoulders were shaking tipped him off. Anai, Durin, and Asek followed the others in, looking around for a place to sit when a cheery voice called across the room. Seating for the hungry! A Tiophianiar woman with cat eyes was waving to grab their attention. The group wove their way through the crowd and came to a table with enough seating for the group. Settling in, Anai looked up at the woman. Has it been busy tonight, Vilanya? Vilanya nodded in affirmation. The weekend is always so busy. Of course you know us. We love the business. I see as well that you have some foreign company tonight. A beaming smile lit up her face as she looked over the three human guests. By your garb, may I correctly assume that you are the new Tiophirat? She looked at Jonathan as she asked her question. Yes, I've been studying under Dern for a week now. Well, how do you like it so far? It is hard work, but it is very satisfying. I've really enjoyed it. Vilanya clapped excitedly. I knew you would. She looked over and gave a polite nod in Magnus's direction. Always wonderful to have you in our establishment, Magnus. He nodded back in reply. Then she looked curiously at Galta. And who might you be, young man? Galta, not the most outgoing of boys, ducked his head and replied, I'm Galta. I'm Magnus's son. Vilanya beamed at him. So glad to have finally met you. Magnus has told us so much about you, but he never told me you were such a handsome boy. Galta flushed with embarrassment, not liking being the center of attention. Since this is your first time, you must have the Cavapalosa. Temporarily forgetting his shyness, Galta furrowed his brow in confusion. The what? Jonathan was tempted to mess with him and try to gross out his cousin, but he didn't want to offend Vilanya or her husband. It's an armored slug that they serve with American-style biscuits and gravy. I know how slug sounds, but I've had it and it's really good. Galda raised his eyebrows at that, but then Magnus chimed in. I've had it as well. It's actually quite good. He looked at them both, trying to decide whether or not they were pulling his leg. Shaking his head, he gave in. I guess I'll try it. Vilanya clapped excitedly. It seemed to be a favorite expression of hers. You'll love it. She leaned closer to the table and whispered. I'd never admit it in front of my husband, but Giratek is a better cook than I am. Since he is cooking tonight, you'll be in for a real treat. She bobbed back upright, a grin plastered across her features. Then she took a pen and notepad, preparing to take their orders. Jonathan noted that these items seemed to be another import from Earth. All right, we'll start with drinks. Then if everyone knows what they want, I'll take the food orders as well. As she wrote down the orders, a man in blue and gray Tiophianiar garb approached the table and patiently waited as the group made their orders. Philana finished writing and closed the notepad, dropping it into her apron pocket. "Very good. I'll have that coming right up for you." She spun around, momentarily caught off guard by the new arrival. Recovering quickly, she bowed her head. "Welcome in. Will you be dining as well, Lieutenant?" He smiled, nodding his head in return. "I'm afraid not. I am on duty right now." "Oh." Philani glanced at the two high-ranking guests at the table, then replied, "Then I shall let you get on with your business." She turned and headed for the kitchen. Durin stood up from the table. "What has happened?" Asek looked between the pair, uncertain if he would be needed as well. The lieutenant shook his head and waved a hand in dismissal. "It is nothing so urgent, but the council has a message for both of you and requested it be delivered in person, so as to ensure it reached you both." Durin sat back down and waved a hand for him to continue. "Sorry to interrupt your meal, but it has come to the council's attention that Dominorum is still an active threat." Confused, Jonathan looked to Durin, hoping for him to elaborate. The Chauffeur was sitting up straight and still, his fists clenched so tight that they were shaking. It was hard to read his emotions since he couldn't change his facial features, but it was obvious that the news upset him. The lieutenant seemed not to notice as he continued his report. "We found the remnants of a destroyed village in Germany. It was a small settlement, perhaps 5 buildings in all. It reeked of the vampire's work. All the buildings were burned. As for the people, all we found were corpses. Not even the women and children were spared. Most of the bodies had no fatal wounds to speak of, but there wasn't even the faintest trace of mana left." "That sounds like their handiwork, all right," Asek remarked. The lieutenant nodded. "That is what we thought, but there is one difference. They left a survivor." Durin sat back in his seat. "Did they give a description of the attackers?" The soldier averted his eyes and shuffled his feet. "Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get anything from him. His mind has been turned to mush. The only thing we got out of him was a single word: cold. He kept saying it over and over, despite our attempts to warm him up. We did find this, however." He reached into his pants pocket and withdrew a medallion. Carefully, he placed it on the table for Asek and Durin to see. Jonathan leaned forward and frowned as he saw what looked like a large tree carved into it. "The World Tree! You found one of the Kentashra!" Asek seemed really excited, but Jonathan had only become more confused. "It is good to know that they have survived all these years," Durin added. The soldier smiled. "I agree. Hanyal and Quesep have been sent on a diplomatic mission to the Kentashra's old manor house to see if they are willing to join forces with us again." A second Durin nodded in approval. The lieutenant simply nodded back in reply. "The council wishes both of you to be aware, but at the moment it doesn't seem that they pose a major risk. That's all I have to report at the moment. I'll leave you all to your meal now." They bade him farewell, and he left for the exit. Jonathan looked at Durin as the soldier departed, but the chauffeur pointed behind him. "Wait until we have been served supper. Then I will explain what is going on." Philana rolled her cart next to the table and began to place food and drink before her guest. 2 thoughts came to Jonathan's mind. The first one was how he had never heard the cart approaching. Usually, a cart like that would rattle and squeak as it went along, but that seemed not to be the case here. He could only think that they must have enchanted the cart, and recently. "I'm pretty sure it made noise last time," he thought. The other thought that occurred to him is how quickly the food had come out. It had only been a few minutes since their order had been taken, yet all of their meals were prepared. From how it sounded, only Girtek was cooking in the back. They must run a really efficient kitchen, he mused. Gouda was served last, Valonia placing it dramatically in front of him. Jonathan had to hold back a laugh as he saw the look of horror on his cousin's face. Their server clasped her hands behind her back and leaned in slightly over the table. She watched in silent expectation as he picked up his fork. Swallowing nervously, Gouda picked up his knife as well and cut a small portion of the slug. He wrinkled his nose and looked back up at their server, but she only smiled and nodded her head in approval. Deciding to get it over with, he popped the food in his mouth quickly and chewed with his eyes shut. His eyes popped open, and he stopped chewing. "Oh!" Valonia covered her mouth with her hand as she chuckled with delight. "Oh, if only you knew how many times we have seen Earthlanders react in that same exact way. Well, I better get back to work." She grabbed her cart and moved along. When she had left, Durin sighed and shook his head. Looking up at Asek, he said, "I suppose we should inform Giratek as well." Asek frowned and nodded. "It's not fair to him, but he deserves to know. Hate to do it, though, now when he finally has all he ever dreamed of." Durin put a palm to his forehead and sighed again. "I know. I hate it as much as you do." Then he looked at Jonathan. "You are owed an explanation. Around 800 years ago, Tiophianiar accidentally created the bridge, attempting to teleport home, using an amulet much like the ones we wear today. We are still not exactly sure how he managed this, but the prevalent theory is that the hot spring here in Tiophianiar was a natural spring of mana. The mana within was used up when it linked with its sister on Earth. However it happened, it allowed for the Tiophianiaran to leave and go to Earth. Many wished to leave and hide amongst Earth's people. They cast glamours to hide their true eyes, so that they might blend in. Despite their departure from these borders, many here still felt obligated to protect them. That is why, when the attack started, a military force was formed to help our people. From our findings, the main threat was in Germany. Small villages would be attacked and wiped out, but many victims would be found without any wounds. Eventually, we came across the Kentashra, and they filled us in on everything. The Kentashra are a coven of witches and warlocks who have done battle with Dominorum for hundreds of years. Jonathan frowned as he tried to follow along with this tale. "Who are they?" Dominorum is a cult that has learned some truly dark spellcraft. What they are most known for is how they drain the mana from their victims. Completely draining the mana from an organism will kill it. Dern shifted in a seat, seeming to Jonathan to look very uncomfortable talking on the subject. Again, the Tiophiar's thoughts were hard to read without facial expressions to go by. Looking at Anai, he saw a sad look in her eyes. She looked as if she was waiting for her husband to elaborate further on the point. He pushed those thoughts aside to focus back in on the story. Not only do they drain the victim, but they feed off the mana. They convert it into sustenance for their bodies. In doing this, however, they cause a nearly unbreakable cycle. Like a drug addict, they become dependent on it, and crave and need more to keep going. Part of their initiation is to drain a victim in a ritualistic manner. We began to call them vampires, comparing their need for mana to a vampire's need for blood. Dirae Dominorum was always on the move, so they were difficult, if not impossible, to track at times. Instead, we hid people among remote villages to alert our military to potential attacks. Together with the Kentashra, we fought them for hundreds of years. Even I took part before I was elected Tiophiar. I fought alongside good men, such as Asek and Giratek. Giratek was a soldier? Jonathan couldn't believe the cheerful restaurant owner was once a warrior. Well, the sec joined in the conversation with a grin. He was technically our camp cook, but he did put up a real fight when he did take the field. Durin chuckled. That he did. I think he was best described as a warrior with a passion for cooking. A sec nodded in agreement. Getting back on topic, when we returned after the incident, 400 years had passed. Our assumption had been that both groups disappeared over time. But when one of our historians ran into a vampire some years ago, the chauffeur moved his hand in a kind of gesture. We had hoped it had just been a small remnant, but now they are at their old game again, it seems. It may come time to go back to war. With that said, an awkward note crept into his voice as he said, It may be best for you to resign as chauffeuret. What? Jonathan spluttered, trying to gather his thoughts. But I've only been studying with you for a week. Yes, and in that week you have progressed faster than anticipated. What I thought would take a month, you have achieved in a week. You are truly a natural, and I appreciate the hard work you have put in. But you did not sign up for a war. Totally shocked, Jonathan stared at Dern in disbelief. When you asked me to be your apprentice, you said you wanted me to know what it was like to be a Tiophianiar. I have been learning the magics, wearing the clothes, and eating the food of a Tiophianiar. I have come to know the people and love and respect them for the hard-working men and women that they are. Now you want me to abandon them? Jonathan, you have to understand. Dern tried to calm him down, but he refused to listen. You aren't even sure what their numbers are. It could just be 20 men. I don't want to cower away from that. And from the sound of it, they aren't even that big of a threat if they have to sneak around and attack little unprotected villages. Not sure how to convince the boy, the chauffeur looked to Magnus for aid. Magnus only laughed and looked at his nephew. You are definitely your father's son. Expecting an attack from both sides, Jonathan sat up straight in his chair. Huh? I agree with chauffeur Durin. I've spent time among the Tiophianiar and have heard the stories. Dirae Dominorum is a dangerous group without mercy. They won't hesitate just because you are young. In fact, they may target you since you are young and inexperienced. If you still insist on this path, I won't stop you. Though, it is still Durin's decision. Stunned, Jonathan looked at the chauffeur, who was staring at Magnus in silence. Then he sighed and shrugged his shoulders. Well, I was 14 myself when I joined the fight against the vampires. I do not see any point in arguing this farther. Yes! Jonathan was glad he was being allowed to continue as the chauffeuret, and even if he did get involved in a war, he had no regrets. However, the way Durin said that one word made him think he was going to make him regret staying on as the chauffeuret. Since you may potentially be going into battle, you are going to have to wake up early and do double the training along with all of the jobs I have planned for you to do. Oh, Jonathan was not pleased by this outcome, but he was determined to do what he must. Okay, I can handle it. Good. I will allow you time to go home Sunday so that you may uphold the Sabbath. I know your uncle would not want you missing church. Jonathan nodded at this. Then they returned to their meal. It was decided that they would wait and speak with Giratek. They informed Felania of their decision, and she made sure to check in on them periodically to see if they needed their drinks refilled. An hour later, the last of the patrons left, throwing farewells over their shoulders. After taking the time to clean up, Giratek came out of the kitchen and made his way to the group. Hello, friends! They all gave polite greetings. Then he looked to Durin. Vilania says you guys need to talk to me. Is everything all right? We thought you deserved to know what is going on, Dirae began. Dirae Dominorum is becoming more active again. They attacked a small village, leaving only a single survivor. The perpetual smile on Guratek's face faded. He took in a deep breath, letting it back out in a long sigh. I was afraid they might start up again. It was too much to hope that time would deal with them. The good news is that the Kentashra has survived as well. Asek smiled at him, trying to bring the mood back up. It did help some. Guratek smiled at this. Good. It will be nice to have some old allies to stand with us. Darren stood up from the table. We can only hope that their numbers are small. Sorry to have bothered you, but we thought that, as a friend and former warrior, you should be informed. Guratek thanked them, and the group left for their homes. Sorry. Then I should let you get on. Then. Vilania glanced at the two high-ranking guests at the table, then replied, Then I should